Greetings, everyone. This is John Kountouris, and you are listening to my show, Greek News on Demand, which is based off of my news blog, GreekNewsOnDemand.com. That's one word, GreekNewsOnDemand.com. This is a radio show where I discuss basically all the latest current events going on in the Greek world, both in Greece and around the world. The information that I provide for you is some of the latest, most reliable, and up-to-date information on the Greek world. My personal website is johnkountouris.com. That's spelled JOHNKOUNTOURIS. And there you can learn more about me, about my career as a journalist, and the work that I do as an activist. You can see some of the Greek radio and TV programs that I appear on. And you can also see my two latest books that I have written about Greece, about the Greek language, culture, history, and also about modern Greek political events. And basically those two books contain everything you need to know about the truth about the Greek people, both from the past and in the present. So, why is Greece important? Why do we need to be updated and informed about what's going on there? How does this affect our lives? Why should we basically as Americans learn about what's going on in Greece? Etc., etc. These are all questions, basically, that I'd like to actually plant in the minds of my listeners, because only doing so will they be able to understand the value of the Greek people, their contribution to the Western world, and why we all should basically be in an effort, in a struggle, in order to help save and preserve basically their culture. I could tell you this, the Greek people are a very powerful people. They're very smart people. They're very loving, kind people, but they're also a very embittered people. And the reason why they are is because basically they feel that they've been sold out and betrayed constantly over the years, that by the Western forces, by America, by Great Britain, etc. They feel that their contributions to the Western world have been undermined, basically by the Western powers, and that the Western powers seek to basically are seeking to eradicate them as a people, their history, and to basically rewrite history, and thus basically undermining all that they've given to the world. Now, why is that? Well, that's a good question, and that's something that I constantly basically pound on and expose throughout every single one of my broadcasts by going over past and modern political events in Greece. So the Greek people are very upset because they feel like, hey, we founded the Western world. We've contributed so much to Western society. Every Western language is a subset of the Greek language. Art, architecture, math, everything came from the Greeks, which is a fact. And, of course, my books go over that. And, of course, you can basically consult German and French and British scholars over the past several hundred years on that subject, and they will confirm that to you. So, the Greek people today, what they need is basically our love, our support, and our attention. And they also need us to understand them and their point of view. So, I can tell you this, that they are very upset at America and Israel because they think that basically, and of course Turkey, because, these countries have done so much harm to them, and rightly so. I've been going over recently a lot of different publications of top Greek journalists where they go over in detail how basically the United States government and Israel and other Western powers have been meddling in Greece's affairs for decades in order to basically control the political scene for their own benefits, and at the same time destroy the Greek people, their language, their heritage, and replace them basically with a multicultural society, which is exactly what's going on right now. Not just in Greece, but everywhere else. That's a fact. That is not a conspiracy theory. Those aren't just my opinions. Those are the stated goals of the global elite, of the powerful Jewish elite, which basically they state openly in their newspapers and their publications everywhere. They make no bones about it. So the Greek people today are very upset because they believe that it's the United States and these powers, along with, of course, Europe, the European Union, the Troika, which is the European Central Bank, the European Community, and the IMF, that are destroying their country, and they're right. So this is something that basically all of my listeners need to know, need to understand, in order to basically understand what the Greeks are going through, understand their mentality, and be able to better help them through any efforts that we can do, through basically our journalism, through our activism, through the articles we publish on our news sites, on our blogs, through the videos that we make, etc., etc. So basically, the information that I get and I provide on this program, as I've stated before, comes from the best sources. It comes from the Greek government itself. It comes from top Greek journalists. It comes from Greek intelligence services. It comes from a myriad of sources. So, I'm not here to string you along. I'm not here to BS anyone. I'm not here to state just my opinions, but to give you my opinions about what's going on, along with all the facts that I can provide for you from the best sources. This is what I do. This is my life. This is my passion. And my goal is to take this message about what's going on with Greece and to spread it around the world so that the world tide of public opinion will change. And people will begin to realize, hey, the Greeks who gave us everything are going to hell in a handbasket. We need to help them. We need to reach out to them. We also need to learn more about them. They've offered and done so much for the world, for Western society, for all nations. And we don't even know basically 10% of what they've offered to the world. We've learned a few things here and there in academia, in our own personal studies, but we don't know anything. And it's true. And we don't know that much about what the Greeks have done. And that's why I've written my 2 books. But what we need to do is basically understand the message right now that needs to be spread about Greece, about its economic crisis, about how it's in danger of becoming extinct as a nation, as a people. And we need to do something about it. Because my point is here, if we don't, we lose Western civilization. Because Western civilization is nothing more than Hellenism. And that's a fact. So, sit tight, because I got a lot of information to share with you for this broadcast. And I think you're going to like all that I have to share with you. Okay, so let's go straight to GreekNewsOnDemand.com for the latest developments in the Greek world. Today I was informed by a good friend of mine, Manolis Hadjisavas. Manolis Hadjisavas is his name. He is a top Greek intelligence agent who's been outed, whose cover's been blown, because there are traitors in the Greek government who understood that this gentleman was getting too close to the conspiracy, basically, that is going on in the Greek government to the detriment of the Greek state, to the Greek people. So these people decided about a year ago to blow his cover, to leak his name and his title, his office, to the press, thus exposing him to the enemies of Greece, particularly the Turks. So, at this point, he's pretty much in hiding with his family. But he's well connected with politicians from nations around the world. And he's in a pretty safe position right now. What he does every day is basically publish bombshell articles about what's going on in the Greek world. And he also publishes articles about what's going on in other parts of the world. And I think you're going to like the stuff that he has, because he and I are basically going to soon release a huge major bombshell about what's going on in Syria. So, I think you're going to want to basically stay tuned to this program and also to my blog, GreekNewsOnDemand.com, for all the latest developments. And I think that you're going to basically appreciate this guy for the work that he does. Basically, he's an intelligence agent. He speaks basically 5-6 languages. He travels around the world, and he basically, what he does is he uncovers fraud about all the major scandals that not only go on in Greece but around the world. And he's very well connected with world leaders. He learns a lot. And he puts himself in risky situations in order to basically get information and to disclose it. That's pretty much all I can say at this point. But this gentleman is something else, to say the least. I met him recently and was connected with him with a very well-known journalist in Greece. And basically, if it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be able myself to get the bombshell articles that I've been publishing in my blog. So today, he sent me an article basically about how the Greek intelligence director in Greece, his name is Yanis Roubatis, who basically is well connected with the Turkish government, who has a media company that's called Euroactive, his own media company, Euroactive. And it's funded and supported by a Turkish finance company called TUSED. So this gentleman basically is already dirty because he has Turks basically funding his media business. We're talking about the enemies of the Greek state, and also he's also the intelligence chief of the Greek intelligence services. So there's a conflict of interest here. And this is a very, very dangerous person. He's a very, very scandalous person. I've written many articles about him in conjunction with other people in Greek intelligence. So this is the guy, though, that needs to be exposed. So today, what type of revelation did we have about this guy? Basically, what Manolis, this Greek intelligence officer, wrote in Greek, and I'm going to translate it from Greek into English, is that this gentleman, Yanis Roubatis, the Greek intelligence chief, is well connected with none other than Stratfor, the Israeli information brokering service. And what this guy is doing, Mr. Rubatis, is he's sending to third parties, he's providing for third parties information, okay, from his media business and what it appears to from his intelligence services. And again, see the conflict of interest here. He's providing these third parties with information that he should not, but he's bound, though, by a contract that basically he signed between Stratfor and his media company, Euroactive. So basically, this obligation arises from this contractual agreement where it requires him to share information, reports, findings with this American company Stratfor, which has basically its seat in Austin, Texas, from what I've read and I've gathered. Now, I've also read that Stratfor has bases around the world, too. It's a very powerful company, but it's Jewish interests. That's the key thing here, basically, for us to understand. That Stratfor is an Israeli company, and it works tightly with the CIA. So, I'll give you an example. I published an article back in October of 2015 in Greek. It's only in Greek. But basically what it says is that Stratfor admits that the coup that basically took place in the Ukraine back in 2014 was basically hatched out by the United States. It was hatched out by the United States on account of Russia's position basically about the Syrian crisis. That's very key. And it's also very revealing. So basically, what I do is I quote an article that was written on the 19th of December 2014 by a Russian news source. It's called SputnikNews.com. I'm sure you've heard of it, SputnikNews.com. So basically, what this article does is it makes clear to all of us that basically Stratfor, which is basically, again, an Israeli company, admits, for the most part, the truth about the situation so much in the Ukraine, both in the Ukraine as well as in Syria. And that's very key. That is very, very key. So, what I'm going to do is pull up for you the English article, the English version of this article, if I can find it. And basically, if I can't, then basically I will have to translate it from Greek. So, here we go. The United States plotted the coup, which took place in Ukraine in February 2014, in response to Russia's policy in Syria. That's very interesting. Says George Friedman, the founder of the CEO of Stratfor, known as, quote-unquote, Shadow CIA. Moscow, December 19th, Sputnik News. The United States is behind the February coup in Kiev, which came in response to Russia's stance on Syria. Says George Friedman, the founder and CEO of Stratfor, a global intelligence company. Russia has repeatedly said that the coup in Kiev was organized by the U.S., Friedman told Kommersant newspaper, another Russian newspaper. Indeed, it was the most overt coup in history, the political analyst stressed. The United States decided to act following Russia's successes in the Middle East. A key region for the U.S., Americans saw that Russians could influence what was happening in the Middle East, Friedman said. Russians are one of the many challenges in the region that the U.S. faces, he stated. The U.S. thought Russia's activities were an attempt to harm Washington, the political analyst told the newspaper, adding that the events in the Ukraine should be viewed in this context. That's very interesting. They're saying the events in the Ukraine, and we know what's going on in Ukraine, the Jews have ravaged the Ukraine, and if you read Texmar's article, The Serpent People Return to the Ukraine, it says it all. Basically, the Jews are now recognizing that they're the Khazars. They're starting to admit that. They're not the biblical Israelites. That's just a big farce because of genetic studies that have come out verifying that the Jews of today are descended from the Turkic-Mongolic people, the Khazars. And that's been verified by Jewish geneticists and, of course, historical references to all this for centuries and centuries. And I've written a huge article on this in the Greek newspaper that I write for. Henry Kissinger recently telephoned the Wall Street Journal, and he told basically the top editor, write an article and tell basically Benjamin Netanyahu and Israel that in 10 years Israel's not going to exist. Because of all the fraud that has come out about this whole fake Jewish state, this illegal state based on this whole myth that the Jews are God's chosen people and they have a right to be there. So, that's a side issue, but it is connected with this issue that I'm talking about. So, the Jews basically, they're realizing that, hey, Israel really isn't our homeland. It's really the Ukraine because that's ancient Khazaria. That's where the Khazars were in ancient times. So guess what? They're going back there. Isn't that interesting? So now today, Israeli companies are basically flooding into Ukraine and basically, stealing their money, stealing their natural resources. The United States is allowing all this to happen. John Kerry's son is part of a huge gas conglomerate that's handling the gas resources of the Ukraine. So Israeli companies are allowing to go in and ravage the place. The civil war that's taking place there is basically disrupting life for the poor Ukrainian people, whether they support the West or Russia. It's a terrible situation, and we need to know what's going on there and expose what's going on there. So please read Texmar's article, The Serpent People Return to the Ukraine, and it tells it all. So here we have the Stratfor chief admitting, basically, to what's going on behind the scenes, saying that the coup in the Ukraine was plotted on the part of the U.S. and, of course, Israel in response to Russia's policy in Syria. So Ukraine is connected with what's going on in Syria. The issue in Ukraine is directly tied in with the Syrian crisis. That is the key point here. That's according to a top intelligence chief from Stratfor, which I believe him, because basically it all makes sense if you look at the wider picture here. So let's continue with this article. Russians, and Friedman, of course, continues, the Stratfor chief. Russians seem to have underestimated how seriously the U.S. would react to Moscow's activities in the region, and that they would easily respond, Friedman said. The U.S. understood that the thing Russia wants the least is instability in the Ukraine, he added. So basically, from what we're reading so far in this article, the United States basically hit Russia in a weak spot, the Ukraine, because Russia's stance on Syria. Now, if you want my opinion about what's going on, this whole rise in tensions between the United States and Russia is nothing more than another New World Order attempt to create another Cold War, as a distraction to what's really going on, and that is all of these all these leaders, world leaders, Putin, Obama, Cameron, Hollande, Merkel, all these, they all belong to the New World Order. They're all Freemasons, and they're all controlled by very powerful Jewish interests from the top. That's a fact. You can see the pictures where, Putin's walking around in a Freemason garb with George Bush. Gee, what is that? What does that mean? I mean, aren't they supposed to be, enemies? Aren't they supposed to be, opponents? No, they're not. Because when they all get together, they all schmooze and they're all best friends. And it doesn't seem like at all that they're enemies. And that's indicative, basically, of the truth. That's of the fact that they're all playing in one huge drama being enrolled before the eyes of all the world. And these guys are actors in this drama. End of story. The Cold War was a major hoax because the United States needed to keep going with its attempt to create a new world order, and that entails order out of chaos. They had finished with World War II, and then they were desperate to basically start another type of situation where it would keep America under a national state of emergency so that they can forestall basically constitutional rights, which they've been doing since 1933, when FDR declared the National Emergency Banking Act, which enslaved and corporatized every individual in America, along with all the states and with the federal government. But that's another issue, which we'll get into later, because that does tie in with Greece, because all Western governments are private corporations of the Rothschilds. And don't quote me on that. You can quote the New Hampshire legislature and other state legislatures that are getting into all of that. And it's true, and it revolves around the missing 13th Amendment, the missing original 13th Amendment from the real United States Constitution. But anyway, what these guys are doing is they're involved in a big drama, and they're fooling all of us. And they're making us think, oh my God, the United States can go and attack Russia at any moment. Because of all the reports we're hearing on the news. We're hearing reports of the United States testing missiles here and the Russians testing missiles there. And Kim Jong, whatever his name is in North Korea, is testing missiles and this and that and blah, blah, blah. What they're doing is carrying out this order, quote-unquote order, out of this chaos in order to advance their agenda. And that is to enslave the planet, to control natural resources, to kill off 80% of the population because they hate us all. And that's what this is all about. So they have to keep this whole game going. They have to keep up the pretenses in order to eventually get to that goal. And they can't have Christians and patriots and conservatives like us in the way, because all we're going to do is just prevent all that, because we are a moral preserving force in the world. And they can't have people like us in the way. That's why they have to get rid of the good-loving American Christian people, Greek Christian people, Russian Christian people, Ukrainian Christian people, Syrian Christian people, Egyptian Christian people, because we know what's going on. We're informed. We're a moral preserving force. And they need to have chaos in order to advance their order. And we won't allow that. So that's why they're committing atrocities in all these areas around the world, including the United States, in various different degrees. As we all know, they get us in different ways, through the medical system, through the financial system, etc., etc. But trust me, they want to get us too, directly. They want to bury us with whatever that entails. That's why they got the FEMA camps. That's why they got coffins set up next to these camps. That's why they're preparing for martial law. That's why they've militarized the police, the police, the IRS, Social Security services, etc., etc. Those are all facts. So that's why Obama, too, is preparing to bring into this country something like several million Muslims from this whole immigrant crisis in the Middle East. That's a fact. We have the documents. So basically, they're advancing their agenda. This is what this is all about. So let's not take sides and say, well, America's better than Russia, or Russia's better than America. Putin, he's a patriot. Obama's not. That's all a distraction. You need to see deeper about what's going on behind the scenes. And that's what I tell to the Greek people, who are very much caught up with worshiping Putin because they think Putin is some great Orthodox leader that's going to save them and this and that. And I tell them, look, there's a lot about Putin you don't know. First of all, Putin is Jewish. That's a fact. In his own autobiography, it's come out that he is, because basically his mother's name is Jewish, which is mentioned there. But the issue goes beyond that, and I've written many articles about that, and you can find that online. If you just Google that query, you can find a lot of articles on that. So, which is another issue, but it does tie in with this because the fact that he is Jewish means that he's tied in with powerful world Jewry, and every week he is counseled and takes advice from the very powerful Jewish group Chabad Lubavitch. And that's a fact, and you can find mainstream news articles on all that. So let's continue with this article a little bit. The head of Stratfor, also known as the Shadow CIA, quote-unquote, insisted that Russia's involvement in Syria was not the only reason for the Ukrainian crisis. However, many in Washington started to perceive Russia as a problem, the expert told the newspaper, adding that at that time, the U.S. decided to divert Russia's attention away from the Middle East. Syria has been in a civil war since March of 2011. Over 100,000 people have died as a result of the armed conflict. Russia repeatedly stated that the election of Syria's President Bashar Assad was legitimate. The people of Syria should control their future. From the beginning of the war, the U.S. supported the opposition and stated that the conflict would not be over with Assad in power. Anyway, we know that the United States now is flip-flopping and backtracking on that issue. So, I told you all that about Stratfor, so you get a little clue about Stratfor. So you understand what role they play in information brokering, what role they play in the exchange of information between nations. So here you have the CEO admitting a major truth about what's going on. And from time to time, you're going to get that from mainstream news media, from world leaders, so we just have to pay attention, because that comports with basically all the evidence that's already out there about Ukraine and Syria and so on and so forth. So Stratfor has also been involved with other major Greek issues. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back to the issue I was stating before about how the Greek intelligence chief, Yanis Roubatis, is taking information from Stratfor, and he's utilizing it. And he also, according to agreement, he's written up with them with his own media company, because he's an actual journalist. He never had training in Greek intelligence, which is ridiculous. So the agreement he has with Stratfor is between his media company and Stratfor. So according to this agreement, he is bound to offer critical information about what he gathers from his media business to Stratfor, but obviously this is a conflict of interest because he's the intelligence chief, and obviously what's going to stop him as the intelligence chief from giving intelligence, Greek intelligence, to Stratfor, which is nothing more than high treason, which is beyond suspect. It's just straight evil. It's high treason. It's a total major conflict of interest here. So it's easy to figure out what's going on here, and this is really what this article is about by this Greek intelligence agent, Manolis Hadjisavas. So basically, Stratfor is a company that deals in strategic forecasts and provides confidential services to big companies like Lockheed Martin, Northrop Grumman, Raytheon, government services, amongst which are the U.S. Department of Homeland Security, the U.S. Marines, the U.S. Defense Intelligence Agency, etc., etc. So basically, this new piece of evidence is documented. It's evidenced from the written agreement between Stratfor and Yanis Roubatis' media company, Euroactiv, and it's all proven by basically some letterhead by Euroactiv, in which basically they mention the following: that Stratfor and Euroactiv would like to form a cooperation in which there will be shared information, reports, and findings amongst both of them on various different issues. Within this relationship, Stratfor will be receiving on a continual basis information and reports from Euractiv, as well as information on critical developments regarding critical evidence of certain events, basically in the Greek world, that present an interest to Stratfor. The information from Euractiv will be provided mainly from the European Union, because Euractiv basically has ties with the European Union as a media business. They are able to glean information from basically different political vehicles from the European Union. But information that the organization will be receiving from the surrounding area and on an international level. So in other words, Stratfor will also be receiving information from basically Euractiv, which they receive basically from, the surrounding area around Greece and other parts of Europe on an international level. So we're talking about highly classified information that Euractiv is able to receive and then give it to Stratfor. Stratfor basically, as an exchange, will share information on a tactical basis with Euractiv in regions basically where it interests them. The analysts, Stratfor's analysts, will be available for interviews, and at other times these interviews will be basically exclusive for Euractiv. So Euractiv will basically be getting exclusive information from this top intelligence firm, is what it's saying. So all that I'm reading to you right now basically is all contained in this agreement, which is secret. That's the whole key here. It's secret. Mr. Yannis Roubatis did not tell us this. He didn't say that he made the secret agreement with Stratfor, which is not only illegal, it's high treason. Because he's the intelligence chief. And the fact that there's a conflict of interest here immediately not only renders this illegal, but this should throw this guy in jail. This is totally insane. But before I go on, what I'd like to do is give you a little bit more background on Stratfor's relations with Greece in general. Back in 2013, or actually 2014, one of the biggest Greek channels, Antenna 1, came out with a report how WikiLeaks was able to pilfer some secret documents from Stratfor relating to Greece. And in these documents, it states basically how Stratfor was getting secret information from the Greek government and sending it to to some major oil companies in the United States who are interested in Greece's petroleum, thus verifying the existence of the fact that Greece's subsoil is rife with natural resources, with oil, with natural gas, with minerals, etc. Which basically verifies and proves that the conspiracy theorists were right about this issue for years, because this is a major issue in modern Greek politics. The issue about Greece's subsoil, how it's filled with tons of natural resources which are worth trillions and trillions of dollars and which could save all of Greece and all of Europe, basically. So here you have Stratfor verifying all this, sending this information to interested oil companies. And, of course, WikiLeaks is able to intercept these and then publish them, which is a huge bombshell piece of information, verifying the existence of all these natural resources, and thus, of course, how if Greece were to go and drill for them to go and utilize all of them, they'd become powerful overnight. So now, of course, the logical question here would be, well, gee, why doesn't Greece do that then, in order to get out of the financial hole? Anyway, that's a huge, huge topic. which I could go on for forever about that. But let's go back to Mr. Roubatis. Mr. Roubatis, Yanis Roubatis, is a very dubious character. He alone can right now save Greece if he wanted to. If he were to reveal the biggest scandal that's been going on in Greece for basically over 10 years. And he has the power to do that as the intelligence chief, but he won't do it because he's bought and paid for. He's with the Turks, he's with Israel, he's with the enemies of Greece, and he doesn't want to do it because he's a very dirty individual. He's sold his soul to the devil for power, for money, and I've written many articles about him. So what am I talking about? Well, this issue where if he were to reveal the scandal, it would save Greece, has to do with how one of the biggest intelligence agents in Greece, a guy by the name of Kostas Agilakis, who basically is the sole person right now in Greece who can uncover the whole fraud about why Greece has gone to hell in a handbasket in the past 10 years, roughly. Because he uncovered basically how sinister elements within the Greek government were planning all this in conjunction with the United States, Israel, and other basically countries. So basically, this whole story revolves around him. So that's just basically the whole summation of it. So Mr. Roubatis, basically, as the intelligence chief, has the power and the authority to help bring this whole issue to light and to help vindicate Mr. Kostas Agilakis, because Mr. Kostas Agilakis has paid a dear price for all of this from the sinister elements that have caused all these problems in Greece. And these individuals have basically dragged him through the courts, trying to accuse him, basically, of various different things as a way to shut him up. Well, every attempt has failed, and he's gone through all the different courts in Greece, and now his case has reached the Supreme Court in Greece, which is called Mars Hill, or the Areopagus. And, of course, that goes back to ancient times, and if you go to the Bible and you read Acts chapter 17, you read how St. Paul went to speak to the Athenians at the Areopagus. So that's where the tradition of the Greek Supreme Court comes from. Anyway, so that's a long, detailed issue, and if I get into all the details, it's going to take forever. So Mr. Roubatis has the power to vindicate Mr. Kostas Agilakis, and this would be used as a means to expose the scandal that I stated, which would then help save Greece from the situation it's in with the traitors that have betrayed it and have led it under this 6-year-long economic fake economic crisis, which basically the solution for all of this was, of course, Greece going under the control of the Troika with these memorandums that it's written with the Troika. So, if Mr. Roubatis were to basically speak the truth on this issue, he would not only vindicate Mr. Kostas, but he would also help basically expose what's been going on in Greece all these years. And it would help shed major light on the truth about this Greek economic crisis. It would expose all the players behind it. It exposed how the fact that it was basically fake in order to enslave the Greek people and steal their natural resources. This is how deep this individual's case runs, Mr. Kostas Agilakis. This is what I've concluded in all my research, and I have researched this case very well with some of his associates, including his own attorney. which I've helped to put on Greek television here in order to explain his case. And I've written several articles, too, about Costa. And this is a major issue. But Mr. Roubatis, though, refuses to help vindicate Mr. Costa in all the courts. And thus this scandal continues. And thus Mr. Kostas Agilakis continues to be persecuted. And thus Greece continues to be sold out down the road with this vicious cycle of this economic crisis having no end. So my point is here about all of this is just how basically sinister this individual is, Mr. Roubatis. So basically my colleague Manolis Hadisavas, this intelligence agent, has exposed how Mr. Roubatis is a very sinister individual, and he has relations basically with the enemies of Greece. He's basically giving off the secrets of the Greek government to Stratfor so they can use this information and sell it to all these nations or companies or, God knows who, for their own benefit at the expense of the Greek people. And this is just very, very evil. This is just high treason, like I've said before. So, this is the political climate in Greece. These traitors, they have totally sold out Greece to basically the New World Order in order to destroy Greece. This guy, Mr. Roubatis, is just one of the traitors in the Greek government who's helping to facilitate all of this. And it's just a total disaster, and it's sad. Now, there's a big issue going on right now in Greece. We're going to switch topics here. There's a big issue going on about how basically the Greek government is deciding to forbid political leaders in Greece from having money in offshore companies, from owning shares in foreign companies, from owning offshore companies, owning companies in other countries. And this is basically something where the issue just all of a sudden came up. And now the Greek government wants to vote on it and make it a law, where if you're a Greek politician, you can't basically have your money abroad because that is unpatriotic. It's wrong. That's an indication how basically one individual is corrupt. Or rather, that's an indication that if a Greek politician were to have his money abroad, invested in some company or in some offshore bank account, let's say, that is indicative of the fact that the guy is not only a tax evader, he's a traitor. That's how paranoid Greeks are about basically people having their money abroad. Now, for years, tax evasion has been a major issue in Greece. And it's an issue where it really needs to be delved into, and it really needs to be elucidated a lot more, because there's a lot of people who are hung up on it, and many people think that, if you have your money abroad or if you don't pay your taxes, you're evil and you're a traitor and you should go to jail. Well, that's very interesting, because we have the same people here in the United States who say the same things about people who don't pay their taxes, about people who hide their money in other countries, about people who are running from the IRS, blah, 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 etc., etc. That's very interesting. Well, this issue really needs to be dealt with, because behind all of this are the usual suspects, are the private corporations that control our Western governments, are the Rothschilds, are the Jewish bankers, the Jewish attorneys, who control all of this. And we know here, now in the United States, that the Federal Reserve Bank was illegally voted into law, which led to the financial tyranny in this country, which led to the legal income tax with the passage of the 16th Amendment, which was not passed. It was all legally done, basically. And not only that, in 1916, 3 years after its passage, the Supreme Court ruled against it, saying basically that it's unconstitutional. But of course, our politicians ignored all this and tyrannically imposed it on us. And there is no law anywhere requiring us to pay income tax. That's all BS. So, the same situation applies in Greece, because in Greece, just like every other Western nation, they have a government that's controlled behind the scenes by, guess who? The Rothschilds. Oh my God, here we go with the conspiracy theory stuff again. Well, I have news for you. The conspiracy stuff is very real, and it's alive and well in Greece as well as in every other Western government, at least. We know, of course, that Syria is being persecuted because they don't want to go along with the New World Order. They don't want a Rothschild central bank. They want to be free. And that's a fact. But if you really want to freak out, just listen to Mr. Jacob Rothschild himself from his Greek mansion in the island of Kerkyra, from an interview he gave to news service there about a few years ago, explain how he and his family basically control Greece. You can't make this stuff up. This is Mr. Jacob Rothschild, one of the remaining heirs of the Rothschild family, stating unequivocally basically all of this, and not so many words. I'm going to play for you this quick interview. Stand by.
Look, I've been here for 40 years. I came with my mother because the great painter Gika, her husband's house had been burnt down in Idra. We had the great good fortune to find this property, which was a ruin when we found it. And I think we've had nothing but happiness here, some of the happiest years of our lives. So yes, I continue to find it a heavenly place, and one which I enjoy coming to as much as I possibly can. One of the great treats of a lifetime. As we all know, Greece went through an extremely difficult period, as did the whole world post-2008. But there's ground for optimism, I think, now. The Greek government was able to raise large sums of money just 2 weeks ago at a rather low rate of interest. The Greek banks have raised substantial capital. My interest subscribed to the new issue of Alpha Bank. It was heavily oversubscribed. We received some shares. The shares went to a premium. They raised over €1 billion. That's quite an achievement, considerable achievement. So there are grounds for optimism. Now the money has to be well spent. And of course there's plenty to spend it on. I mean, the island needs a lot of infrastructure expenditure. Whether it's roads, whether it's rubbish. So to make it a great destination, those infrastructure projects have to be carried out, but they can be. They can be. So I think we should be more optimistic than we have been for several years. I think we all feel that the government has really done well in very difficult circumstances. So I hope that in the forthcoming elections, that they'll be given the opportunity to carry on the good work which they've started out. So now I feel optimistic, but we would like surely a period of consistency and not too much change, although the reforms of institutions in Greece does need to carry on and to be rationalized. It's that classically difficult balance, isn't it, between we need tourism here, we need lots of people to come here, at the same time we don't want the place overrun, so that the things which made Corfu the beautiful place that it is, the historic place that it is, are in any way undermined. So that's a very difficult balance, a very difficult circle to square. I think if you look at what's going on, with the history of Corfu, I mean, this year is the 150th anniversary of the handing over of the Ionian Islands to Greece. They're being celebrated in a good way. If you look at the institutions, whether it's the museums, whether it's the forts, whether it's the historic sites, whether it's the archaeology, whether it's the music, whether it's the opera, whether it's even the academies, learning and scholarship, they're in pretty good shape, but always more can be done. And I think if one could get those into even better shape with more infrastructure spending on the basic things that people need, that the quality of tourism will be enhanced and will continue. So in the round, I'm quite optimistic, and in some ways the recession which brought to a halt this fever of building is not a bad thing for the country to have happen to it. The future of the EU in economic and political terms remains still in the balance, not just for Greece, but for everywhere. I mean, for example, in the United Kingdom, we have great difficulties with the present relationship with Europe and wish to renegotiate many of the terms and the expenses that belong to the European community. If you take Greece specifically, I'm not sure. It's a real problem to be integrated into the rest of Europe at a time of great economic stress. I mean, you've got here very high unemployment, and that induces social unrest. The kind of classical way of dealing with that problem, of course, is to devalue. That's impossible if you belong to the European community. So I think a change in that relationship with Europe for Greece and for many of the other countries will be needed. And the question is, will the reforms take place from within Europe? And if they don't, then there's a risk that the community in its present form will break up. It's all to play for.
So that was Greek News on Demand for today. And we want to thank Mr. Jacob Rothschild for admitting the fact, and not so many words, that he and, of course, his cronies still control Greece, along with its financial system, tax system, everything. And anyway, it's a long issue, so we'll cover it in another broadcast, the whole issue about Greeks basically hiding their money offshore, etc. This is John Kountouris signing out for Greek News on Demand. Thank you very much.